Hello guys, welcome back to another tutorial on complete .NET Web APIs. And as we have seen in the previous tutorials, our API is almost ready for production, but still we are missing something. So if you just execute the get companies endpoint, we are getting the data as expected. But one significant aspect we are missing, without which we can't go to production, and that is authentication, authorization, and permissions. So in these upcoming few tutorials, we'll go through all the authentication and authorization aspect of it. And today what we'll be covering up is authenticating the APIs. So what I will be using is bearer token authentication. And for hashing, we'll use a library called as bcrypt.net. Okay. Usually I used to prefer using identity server for authentication, but recently, since the launch of .NET 6, the identity server 4 is no longer free in production. So it is taken over by a third party called as Joenda. So I'll put this link in the description of the video. So if you want to use this, you can go ahead. But for the scope of this tutorial, I will not cover identity server because it is no longer free. Okay, so let's get started with the authentication piece. So before that, I will tell you about the process, what we'll be doing. So what we'll be doing is we'll create an authentication controller, and we'll have a registration endpoint wherein the user can register his username, email, and password. That password will be hashed using bcrypt.net and stored in the database. And then we'll have another endpoint called login. Okay, so where the user will submit the username or email and password, and that password will be validated against the hash which is saved. And once the validation is successful, we'll generate a JWT token, which is JSON Web Tokens. And once you get that token, all the calls to rest of the endpoints should be made by supplying that JWT web token in the authorization header. So this is the basic OAuth bearer token authentication we'll be following. So before we get started, I'll just show you, I've already created the database structure and tables which we need for this tutorial. So if we go to organization.db and I show you the new table which I've created, which is TBL user details. So it has the ID, which is the primary key, then email, username. I'm also storing the password hash. Then the paging order is deleted, which is common as we've seen in the previous tutorials. And the ID will be primary key. And for email, I've made it a unique key because we'll be using the email to retrieve the user from the database. Okay, so I have also gone ahead and created another stored procedure, dynamic stored procedure, which we were missing. That is, if you see this one, SP get records by specific column. So we were missing this, wherein here you just pass in the column name and the column value, and you can get records from a table based on that particular column. So if you see the where clause, it is applying the column name and the column value. So in this tutorial, we'll be using or making use of this, wherein we'll pass in the email of the user just to check if the user is already registered and to validate against the password. Okay. Again, for this, to use this, we had to create a method in the generic repositories. So I will show you that as well. So if I go to infrastructure, persistence, and repositories and generic repositories, so this is the new method which we have added. So if you see, it's similar to uh, it is similar to get by ID async, but here we get by specific column async. So you supply the column name and the column value. And the third param is like whichever columns you need to select. If you don't specify this, you will get select star. Okay, so as always, it is specifying the table name, then the column name and the column value with which the search needs to be done. And then finally, it's calling the new stored procedure which we have created. Okay. So if you just want to have a look at the stored procedure again, you can pause the video, take it back, and have a look at the stored procedure. Okay. So once this is in place, let's go ahead and create the authentication controller. So we'll go to controllers and we'll create a new class. I'll call it authentication controller. We'll get rid of this. I'll call it public sealed authentication controller, and let's inherit from base API controller. We'll also mark this with the routes and API controller attribute. Okay, once we've created this, we'll also do the standard injection of the Mapster and mediator libraries, okay, which we have done in the previous tutorials so that we can use it. Now I'll go ahead and create the two endpoints. Let's go ahead and create the register endpoint first, wherein we'll take in the user. So I just paste it here. So if you see now, I have already, so it is taking the register user request, and I have already created this DTO. So basically it's a record. So if I go to register user request, it is a record which is taking in username, email, and password while registering. Now, once that is done, it is using Mapster and mapping the register user request to a register user command. Okay, so if we go to application, I have already created another module called user module. And inside this, we have again commands and queries. So as you know, when we try to register a user, it will insert records in the database, and hence this is a write request. So that's why we've put it into commands. So we've added a folder called register user, and I've created a command called register user command, okay, which is taking in the register user request, and the return will be error or off unit because there won't be unit return type. That's the reason I'm using the mediator.unit to specify the return type, which is what. Okay. And we also have a register user command handler. I have done the constructor and injected unit of work as we have done in all the handlers. And I've inherited or implemented the handle method. So here we'll implement the logic of registering the user just in a short while. Before that, I will also show you the authentication controller. Let's move forward. So once the mapping is done, we will call the handler using CQRS. So this is the mediator and CQRS implementation as we know. And finally, we'll return it. We'll return the results. If there are errors, errors will be handled. So this we've already covered up. Okay. So what we'll also do is, since while registering, there can be the user input which is provided can be invalid, like invalid email or passwords which is not matching the policies. So we can also do validation. And for that, what we'll do is we'll create a register user command validator. I'll just add a class called register user command validator. So once we do this, Now, as we've seen in the previous tutorials, this will be inheriting from abstract validator of the register user command which we have. Let's change this to public sealed user validator, and I'll create the constructor and I'll add the rules here, validation rules. I'll show you what those are. So as we have already looked at fluent validation, we'll be adding rule for email. We'll check if it is not null, not empty, and give a error code validation ERR USR01, and message user email is mandatory. I've also created custom validations using Fluent validation. And to do that, you just have to use a custom method. And I'm just passing in the context and the email. And here in the method, I'm checking in if email is not valid, then add the new error, that is invalid user email. And I'm calling it val ERR USR 002. And these similarly, I have done for password as well. And if you see this and this, these are the two extension methods which I have created. So if we go to application common utilities and extensions, I have created these two methods. So these are just basic extension methods which are using just regular expressions. So this is a regular expressions which will validate the email. So you can just go to GPT or Bard and get the regular expressions required for email and standard password policies. Okay. So this regular expression will prevent or make sure that the password contains at least one capital letter, one digit, one special character. So all these validations will be handled by these extension methods. Okay. So now since our validator is ready, so as usual, it will be validating using the validation pipeline handler. So it will be validated using this, as we've seen in the previous validation tutorials. So now since we have created the validator, let's go ahead and start the registration. So how we'll do is, since we are using CQRS, let's go to the register user command handler and try to implement the registration process. Okay. So as I've shown you that I have created the uh, uh, new table, which is TBL user details. So corresponding to that, I've also created the model in the domain. So if I go to user domain, user models, and I've created this user, and I've created the ID, username, email, and password hash. I've marked the columns in the database and also marked email as distinguishing unique key, which will be used to retrieve the entry from that table. Okay, and also it's inheriting from IDB entity and specifying the table name here. Okay, and I've also created the repositories required. So if you see in application interfaces, we have iUser repository, which has one method, which is get user email. Okay, and I also have the implementation for it here in infrastructure, that is user repository, which again has the implementation for this. And this is doing nothing but calling get specific column by async, the one which we have created, uh, and I've shown it to you just now. I'm just passing in the column name by which I need to retrieve the records, and it will get it for me. Okay. So now what is pending is, let's do the registration part. So we'll get the registration request. And one thing I just missed is showing you the mapping. So if you see, if you just go to authentication controller, and the register user command is taking in register user request. So if you go to command, it is taking this as the register user command is taking register user request, which is a DTO. Now to map all the properties of this to all the properties of this, that is register user command. what we need to do is I need to provide specific mapping to it. So I'll just go to API, common mappings and global mappings, and I have to make this entry to specify that register user request and register user command. So the destination dot command, all the properties of a destination, that is this, map it to the source, which is register user command. Okay. So now that's that. So let's go to register user command handler and create the implementation for that. So for here, what we need to first do is we'll be using bcrypt.net. So let's go ahead and uh, download the NuGet package, which is bcrypt.net. Search for bcrypt.net, and this is the one, bcrypt.net hyphen next. Let's download the latest package. And as I've told you, I specifically prefer bcrypt.net because it is the latest way, and the hash which is generated, it cannot be undone in any way. Uh, and you can't retrieve your plain text password even if you catch hold of the password hash. And every time you generate the password hash, even with the same plain text password, the hash will be different. Okay. So what we can do is I can just create the password hash, just name it as hash bcrypt bcrypt.net dot bcrypt dot hash password, and we'll just take in the password from the request which is coming, request dot command dot password. This is the register user command which is coming in. So we generate the hash, and then what we'll do is we'll insert a new entry in the user details table which we have created. For that, we'll just say user dot, yeah. So for that, I'll just say users dot add async. As we've already done, we'll begin the transaction and close and commit transaction. And to email, we'll assign the email property, username and password. And finally, what we'll do is we'll return unit dot value. Okay. So now once this is ready, let's check if our registration is working fine. So this is our table, user details. So now let's start the API and check if we are missing something or if it is working fine. So we'll put a breakpoint in authentication controller register endpoint, and then we'll also put a breakpoint in our handler here. And the API is running. Let's check if we have the Swagger input. Yes, so we have a new controller here, authentication, which has register endpoint. And now what we'll do is we will first make the entry. So if you see here, let's try to make entry. So I'll just add this as John, and email, I'll just say string and password string. So I'll enter email, invalid email and password. Let's see if our validator gets triggered. And this is hit here. And if you see, we are getting 400 bad requests. So one or more validation errors. So it says invalid user email and invalid user password. So our register user command validator is working as expected. So if we just go to So if we just go to the validator, and we are getting exact messages, well, 02 and 04, because both email and password are invalid. So now let's add a valid email. Let's say john.doe at myorg.com. And now let's execute. Now, if you just see, we still have one validation issue, which is password is invalid. So let me add a password, say 1234. So this has one capital letter, one special character, one digit, and this should be valid, I think. So let's execute now. So now if you see, breakpoint is hit. Now if we continue and handler is hit, so validation is successful. So the first thing what we do now is create a hash. So a hash is created, and then we make entry in the database. Okay, and then we return, and if you see, it's 204, so no content, but the entry is created. So let's check in the database. So now if you see, we have registered the user successfully. So we have a password hash, username and email. Now the next thing which we need to do is validate this user, which is registered. So for that, let's create the login endpoint in the authentication controller. And if the user is validated successfully, and once he log in, the next thing what we'll have to do is generate a JWT token. Okay, so let's do that now. So let's go ahead and create the login endpoint. So I'll just create it. It will be similar to register endpoint. Again, I'll take in a login user request. So if I go to this, I've already created this in DTOs. So it takes in email and password. And same thing, I have login user query. So now since register user was a command, but a login is a query because we are just reading and trying to validate if the user exists or no. There's no write to the database here. So this is a query. So login user query and login user query handler. Login user query is this, taking email, password, and returns error or of string, because uh, this will finally return, login user query handler will return the JWT token once the validation is successful. So we'll be working on this now. So for that, what we'll do is we have uh, injected our unit of work and also Mapster in this. So what we'll also do now is create a JWT token generator. So let's see how we can go ahead and do that. Login user query. So first thing what we'll do is we will take in the email and try to validate if the user exists or no. So what we'll do is we'll first from unit of work users get user email, get user by email, and we are passing the email to this. So this is the one which we have just created here. So if we go to user repositories, this is the one which we have created, which will in turn call the new generic repository method which we have created, and the new stored procedure which we have created, and get the records for us. So once we get the user, so it is returning of type user, which is the model, and then we need to map it to valid user response. So I've also created another DTO here called valid user response. It again has ID, email, username, password, hash. And since all the property names are matching that of the user model, we don't have to specifically map it in the global mappings config for Mapster to work. So it will get us valid user response. Okay. Now the next thing what we do is we make a check. If the user is not valid, and bcrypt is So what we'll do is we'll make this check here. So we validate here. So if user is not null and bcrypt.verify. So now we are taking in the password from the request and the password hash which we have saved in the database, which we got from user. Okay, we are verifying. So if this is successful, then this will be true. If not, this will be false. So if user is not null and if the password is valid, then what we'll do is we'll return the token here. We'll just go ahead and generate the token. And else, if it's not valid, what we'll do is we'll return a specific message. For that, we've already created errors. We've already created the partial class called errors, and we have user, and we have a message called incorrect email or password. Okay. Another best practice here is whenever you are validating a user and then validating a password, it's better to give just one validation message instead of giving user email invalid and then user password invalid. Because what that does is if there is any brute force attacker, he gets to know that either the email is wrong or password is wrong. So instead, if either of them is wrong, just give a single validation message saying incorrect email or password. So if you just see, go to domain, I have already created this. So common errors, and we had already seen this. So I've created the new one, errors dot user, and then incorrect email or password, and then I'm returning a validation error, that is ERR USR01. Okay, so let's also name it as validation. So this is the validation error. So VAL ERR USR01. Email or password is incorrect. So this is not 01 actually, this should be 03 because we already have 01 in the previous messages. So let's name it as 03. Okay. So once that's done, so if the user and the password are valid, then we return the JWT token. Else, we return the incorrect email or password validation message. So now let's go ahead and generate the JWT token. For that, what I'll do is I'll go to uh, application and common interfaces and create a class called generator. So let's go to application common and interfaces and create a folder called authentication. And we'll create an interface called JWT token generator. Okay, so it will have a method called generate token. So let's just go ahead and create that generate token, and it will take in the valid user response as input so that we can generate the token based on that. Now we'll go to infrastructure layer and create another folder called authentication in infrastructure. And we'll implement that. So let's create a folder here. We call it authentication. And let's create a new class and call it JWT token generator, which will inherit from the interface which we have just created. Let's remove this. We'll call it public sealed class token generator, and we'll call it our token generator. Now let's implement interface. Yeah, so let's go ahead and implement this. But before that, how we use to generate JWT is what we'll have to first do is in the app settings file, we'll need to create some items. So what we'll do is I'll just create a new setting in the app settings file. So inside app settings, we will need this. That is, I'll create a section called JWT, and I'll need an issuer and audience. So currently the issuer and audience will be same, which is our API URL. In your case, whoever is using your API or the consumer of your API will be the audience, and the issuer will be whichever server you have deployed the API. Okay, so that we can validate the token based on the issuer and the audience as well. So we'll do that now. And another thing, what we'll need is a secret key. But as we've seen in the previous tutorials, we won't be putting the secret key in app settings as plain text. Instead, we'll be using the user secrets manager in development, and in production, we'll be using Azure Key Vault. So for production, I'll just go to Azure Key Vault, and I'll go to my keys and secrets. And if you see, I've already created a secret here, which is version 1 JWT and secret key. To know more about this, you can just check my previous tutorial on how I'm creating it in production. But for this tutorial, I'll be using it from the user secrets manager, which is on the in development. So I'll just right click on my API project and go to manage user secrets. And here, the secrets.json is stored in your app data roaming. So I will just create the secret here, which will be used for generating the token. So this is our secret, and the secret will be coming from user secrets, the secrets.json, and the issuer and the audience will be coming from the app settings. So now since we have this, let's go ahead and also create, I've already created. So if you go to application common, I've created application config options. So as I've already shown you this in the previous tutorial, JWT options, I've created a class which has issuer, audience, and secret key. And then I've created a JWT options setup, which inherits from iConfigure options and takes in JWT option. And then it configures the section from the app settings file. And in global constants, I've already created a section for this, that is JWT. Okay, so once this is done, we are pretty much good. And also in configuration, in dependency injections, I've made an entry for that. So if you check here, it's not an application, so it should be in infrastructure, I guess, because we are using it there. We go to configurations and here. So we have configured this. I've said services.configure options and JWT options setup. Okay. So now since we have this, let's go to the JWT token generator, which we had just created. So let's go to the infrastructure layer and JWT token generator and inject some. So let's create the constructor and inject the JWT options which we have created so that we can use it here. Now here, the first thing what we'll do is we'll create claims. Okay, so we'll say where claims is equal to new list of claims. So in claims, we'll add the user ID and the email. So this claim is coming from system security claims. Okay, we'll just create two claims here. Okay, one is, yeah, so I created two claims and JWT registered claim names. So let's inherit or use system identity model token JWT. So JWT registered claim names dot subject, I'm adding it as user ID, and email, I'm adding it as user email. Okay, so I have the claims. Next thing is, after generating claims, we need to generate the signing credentials. Credentials. So for signing credentials, what I'll be doing is new signing credentials. Okay. Now, signing credentials takes in a symmetric security key as one parameter, symmetric security key. And that key will be the secret key which we get from the app settings, that is the user secrets or key vault in either case. We'll use encoding.utf8.getBytes. So because it expects byte data, so we'll convert the secret into bytes. So underscore options dot secret key. So this is the secret key which we are getting from options. And the next parameter it takes is in the security algorithm. And the one which I prefer is HMACSHA, which is quite good enough and secure, HMACSHA 512 signature. Okay. Once this is done, the next thing is I'll create a new JWT token. Let's do that. So create new JWT security token. So it takes in the issuer, which is coming from app settings again, audience. Then I'm passing in the claims which I've just created. And I'm also passing the expiry time for the token. So it will be valid for 1 hour. So I've given the token expiry time as 1 hour. You can even configure this if you want to keep this in app settings or coming from database, you can do that. But for now, I've just kept this as 1 hour. And I also pass the signing credentials. And then finally, we just return the token. That is return new JWT security token. It is token handler dot write token. And this will write the token which we have just created as string. So now I think we are good enough. So we have created the JWT token generator. So one more thing we have to do is we have to inject it. So we go to dependency injections, that is configuration dependency injection, and we'll have to inject this. So let's go to dependency injections and inject it. So come here and we inject it here. So JWT token generator is JWT token generator. So now since we have dependency injected it as singleton, add singleton. Now we can go to login user query and we can inject it here. So we can inject it here now. And we can use it to generate the token here. Okay. And now the final thing, what is just pending is returning the token. So we'll just use underscore JWT token generator dot generate token, and we'll pass in the user. So now this will generate the token for us. And once that's done, so why is this still throwing an issue? Let's check what we are missing here. Okay, does not return. So we need to return this. Yeah. So now we are good enough. So let's check if our login is working now. We'll go to authentication controller. Let's start the API. And we already know that we have a user email, john.doe@myorg.com, and the password which I had used was India@1234, and I is capital. So let's try now. Let's go to API. Let's put a breakpoint in here, and also let's put a breakpoint in here. Okay. So once we come here and we have login now, let's try to just click on execute. Both email and password are not fine enough. They come here, we get the user as null. So it should give us the validation error now. So which is perfectly fine. So it is giving us just one error message: email or password is incorrect. So we still don't know whether email or password is incorrect. So it's a good practice so that the brute force attackers don't know what is incorrect. So now if we just say uh, john.doe@myorg.com. So now based on the email, it should get us the record. So using this, it should get us fetch as the record. So if you see, the record from the database is fetched, but still the password is incorrect. So it's not validated. So it won't generate the token. It will give us the same issue. Now let's put in the correct password. So I'll add A@1234. So this is the correct password. So using the password verification method from bcrypt, it will try to verify the password with the password hash. If it's correct, then we'll go to generate token. So now if we go ahead, we first create our claims. The security secret from a user secrets manager is there. We do that, we do this, and then we generate the token. And if you see, if you log in successfully, then we get a JWT token. Now let's take this token and we can go to jwt.io so that I can show you how it works. So if we just put the token here and see, so this is our payload, which has the subject as the user ID, the email. This is the expiration time, and this is the issuer and the audience. So this is nothing but the JWT web token, JWT or JSON web token, which we are using. So now we have done half the piece of authentication. That is, we have registered the user and we have logged in successfully. Now let's make the API authenticated. For that, what we need to do is we first need to go to a base API controller. So let's go ahead and do that. We go to base API controller and add authorize attribute, because each controller is inheriting from the base API controller. So this will make all the controller endpoints secure. So once we do authorize and we go to company's controller here, since this one is also inheriting, it will be applied to this. So all controllers will now be authorized. So without passing the bearer token, you won't be able to access it. Also, another thing we need to make sure is we make the authentication controller as anonymous, because the register and the login endpoint should be available without even authenticating, because this is the way you're authenticating. So you should add allow anonymous to the authentication controller. So once this is done, the next thing what we need to do is let's go to the application layer and dependency injections. Let's go to dependency injection. So let's go to API configuration and dependency injection. So now here, what we need to do is we have Swagger. We need to enable authentication inside Swagger. So Swagger, add Swagger gen. What we can do is we'll need to just go to add Swagger gen and options. So add Swagger gen. Yeah, add Swagger gen. Operations filter. Yeah. So options dot add security definition. And here what we do is we add OAuth 2. We say new open security scheme. We'll just remove this. Open security scheme. Okay, it is using Microsoft OpenAI models. And now here, I'll just specify in as parameter location dot header, name as authorization, add name as authorization, and type as security scheme type dot API key. Okay. So once this is done, we are good enough. And then finally, what we need to add is options dot operation filter, and we need to add security security requirements operation filter. Okay, so we do this. Once we have done this, we should run this now. Let's go to program CS. Let's see if everything is fine here. We are good to go. Nothing else needs to be changed. Yeah, I think we are good to go here. And yes, that's it. So in presentation API, so we've added this. So what this will do is this will give you a UI and Swagger to add in your token and authenticate. So it will give you the locks. I'll just show it to you here. So once we do this configuration and we go to API Swagger, now if you see, you have this authorize button here, and So the authentication controller is anonymous, so you don't see any locks here. But if you see the others, there are locks here. And now if you go and try to run the company's controller, get company's endpoint, it should not allow you. No authentication scheme was specified. Yeah, so actually the authentication scheme is not yet specified. So let's do that. But it won't allow you, and it will give you 401, that is unauthorized. Okay. And once you click on this, it is giving you the option to specify the bearer token here. So let's go ahead and specify the authentication scheme now. Now, the next thing, what you also need to do is go to applications, go to infrastructure. So let's go to infrastructure and go to dependency injection. And what we need to specify here is services dot add authentication and dot add JWT bearer. Okay, add JWT bearer. And I think we are missing a reference here. So let's do that. What we are missing here is Microsoft dot ASP.NET Core dot authentication dot bearer. So I think we are missing it here. So in applications, let's have a look where we are missing it. Yes, so we are missing it in the application layer. So we need to specify a package here. We need to download it. That is Microsoft ASP.NET Core dot authentication. So let's go ahead and download that package. Microsoft dot ASP.NET Core dot authentication authentication.jwt bearer. Okay, and let's download the latest version. So once we have done that, and since the infrastructure layer is referencing the application layer, we should already be having it here. So as you see, the red squiggly is gone now. So now we are good to go. Just before that, we need to do another thing. Now, what we'll be doing is we'll be first registering the user, which is already done. Then we'll be logging in. We'll be getting in the JWT token, and then finally we'll be putting it in the header in the new UI which we have shown. Now we need to add a piece which will validate the JWT token, and for that, what we need to do is we create another class here called JWT bearer options setup. Okay, so here I'll create another class called JWT bearer options setup. Okay, like we have created for JWT options, but for JWT bearer options, instead of iConfigure options, we'll use iConfigure named options. Because I've tried using iConfigure options and it was not working for some reason. I'm not sure why that behavior is happening. But if we inherit from I configure named options, it was working for me. And we'll just inherit, so the generic type we'll use is JWT bearer options, which belongs to Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.jwt bearer. Okay. And now what we do is we implement this interface. So it has two methods, configure and configure options. So here we'll just specify configure and pass in the options. It will call in this method. And now here what we do is we validate the token which is passed. So first thing is options dot require HTTPS metadata. So what this says is gets or sets HTTPS if HTTPS is required for metadata address or authority. This is default to true. This should be disabled only in development. So for development, we'll make this false. So it makes sure that the request is coming from HTTPS URL and not HTTP. And the next thing is options dot save token. So we'll put save token as true. And the next thing what we do is we do token validation parameters. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll say validate issuer, validate audience, the ones which we had supplied from the app settings. Then validate the lifetime, validate issuer signature key, validate, and then we pass the valid issuer and valid audience. And for that, what we'll do is we'll again inject the JWT options here in the constructor. So now, and finally, issue a signing key. So this will again use the same key, which is either coming from user secret store or as your keyword, depending on where you have saved it. And once we have created this, now let's go to uh, application dependency infrastructure dependency injections. Let's go to infrastructure and dependency injection. And let's configure this and call it configure JWT bearer options setup. Okay. Once this is done, let's try to run and check if it's working fine for us. Go to API. And now if you see, if we run the company's endpoint without authentication, it gives us 401, which is unauthorized. So now let's try to authorize it. That is, we'll try to log in first and get the token. So John Doe @myorg.com and password is India @1234, capital I. Let's remove the breakpoint. And we have got the token. So now let's copy this token here and we'll go to authorize and we'll say bearer space and we'll just paste in the token and click on authorize. So once that's done, if you see, the locks are now closed and all these are authenticated requests. Okay, so now let's try to run the get company's endpoint. And you see, so we have successfully retrieved the data now. But if we do not authenticate and if we log out and if it does not find the token and we try to execute, it will give you 401 unauthorized. So we have successfully authorized the request now. The same thing, what you can do is you can use Postman to do that. Let me just show you on Postman how you can do that. So the same endpoint we'll use, and I'll just show it to you on Postman, how that can be done. Yeah, so let's use this. So I'll use this URL here, and in authorization, I'll select bearer token, and I'll first try to execute it without the token, and it gives me 401 unauthorized. But when I use the token which is generated and use it in Postman, in bearer token, I put the token here. So if I go to headers and the hidden header, so in authorization header, it has bearer space, the token. Okay. And now if I execute, you see it is getting me all the data. So I think we have pretty much covered the authentication piece, wherein we are generating the JWT token and authenticating all the endpoints. In the next tutorial, what I'll be showing you is authorization, that is permission-based authorization and accessing specific endpoints uh, with specific permission and roles. And we'll also be covering up a concept called refresh token. Okay, so this was it from me. See you in the next one.